Okay, now we're going to talk about the bandsaw. Typically we use a bandsaw to make curved cuts. Okay, let's talk about parts of the bandsaw. Inside our bandsaw here, we have our upper and lower wheel, or our tire. In between each of the wheels, we have our blade, which is one big continuous band. Hence the name bandsaw. Right here we have the guard, blade guard. We can raise and lower depending on the thickness of wood that we are cutting. We have our table here. Mounted on our guard, we have guide bearings that keep the blade from shifting left or right and ultimately coming off the wheel. And we also have a bearing back behind the blade that's going to keep it from pushing off the wheel towards the back as we cut our board. There's also the exact same setup down below here. Again, two more guide bearings and one behind the blade. Okay, now, when we go to cut on the bandsaw, the first thing we need to do before we turn it on or make any cuts is we need to check the height of the guard. We want to make sure that guard is not too high. Now, right now, you can see I have the guard up about 5 or 6 inches. I'm cutting 3/4 inch stock. Probably not a good idea to have that guard all the way up there. Okay? We're exposing all that blade when we don't have to. We can cut a hand off or a finger and that would be done. We want to lower that guard down. So I'm going to loosen the nut on the back here. I'm going to pull that guard down. I want to be about 1/4 inch above the wood being cut. Okay, the idea behind that is the wood can still slide through, but your fingers are going to have a tougher time getting in there. Okay, we're covering up as much blade as we possibly can before we cut. Okay, so let's say we want to cut this board on a curve like that. We can do that on the bandsaw. I'm going to go ahead and reposition the camera so you guys can see that. Okay, so I'm ready to cut my curved line here. As I'm cutting this, I want you to notice where I'm holding my hands. I'm going to try to talk over the bandsaw, but we'll see how it goes. All right, so I've got it marked out. My guard is adjusted. Here we go. I'm going to make my cut. It's okay to let go of the board. If you need to reposition your hand, totally fine. It's not going to come back at you or anything. Just get your hands where you want them. You need to stop and back up a tiny bit. That's also fine. Down by the ground, in front of the saw, there's a pedal that will stop the blade. You got a brake on the blade. Stop the blade before you reach in to remove any scraps or anything like that. So if you're cutting and you've got a bunch of little scraps down around the blade, turn the bandsaw off, stop the blade before you reach in there. I don't want to see anybody trying to reach in there really fast to grab those little scraps out. Okay? Okay, let's talk about a couple safety items. You'll notice when I was cutting, I kept my hands either to the one side, to the left side, or to the right side, or both sides of the blade. What you don't want to do, whenever possible, is get your hand in the path of that blade. So straight out from the blade. You don't want to get your hand in line with that. In case you slip, your hand could go right into that blade. If you have them off to the sides or one side and you slip or the board catches, you're gonna go and you're gonna miss that blade. Okay, you'll notice I was standing in front of the bandsaw making my cut. Do not stand off to the right side of the saw and cut. First of all, this is kind of awkward. You can't see where you're cutting. But there's also a small chance that if that blade breaks, which they do break, if it breaks, there's a chance that the blade's going to come around, hit the table, and come out. If you're standing on the right side of the bandsaw, there's a chance you have a piece of metal coming out at you. Okay, and it's not going to shoot through the wall or shoot out. I've had them come out, 6 inches or a foot. But still, if you're standing here on the side, there's always that risk. So stand in front of the bandsaw, keep your hands to the side. Okay, let's talk about cutting sharp curves on the bandsaw. So if I need to cut, say, a sharp curve like this, I can do that on the bandsaw, but I have to do one additional step. I have to do what's called relief cuts. Now, if I go in here and I just try to cut this out all in one pass, I'm going to twist the blade up, I'm going to put pressure on it, and probably break it. So I need to do what's called relief cuts. So for sharp curves, I would cut into the line and back out. Cut into the line and back out, and so on, all the way around. Okay, I'm chunking this little area here into smaller pieces. Now, as I go to cut this out, I cut into here, I hit my first relief cut, this little piece pops out. That allows me to reposition my blade without twisting it to make that next cut. Cut the next little piece out, and so on. You can go all the way around without twisting that blade up. Okay, so for sharp curves, you have to do relief cuts. Okay, just to review. We want to make sure, first of all, that the guard is set to the correct height. 1/4 inch above the wood still slides through, your fingers won't. Set the height of the guard. When you're cutting, make sure you keep your hands off to the sides of the blade. Whether that's one on each side, both on the left, both on the right, it doesn't matter. Keep it out of the line of the blade, okay? Because that blade will cut very quickly. Because the blade is one big continuous band, it's always going down. The teeth are going down, so it's always cutting. If you think about like a handsaw, you have the same teeth on a handsaw. Well, when you go forward with the handsaw, it's cutting. But when you come back, those teeth are skipping over the board and it's not cutting. So it's a lot slower, right? So for every 2 strokes, you're only cutting 1 stroke, if that makes sense. With the bandsaw, it's always coming down, it's always cutting, it's gonna cut very quickly. So if you slip, you're cutting through your board and you have your hand here and you slip, it's gonna cut right through that board and you're putting your hand into the blade, which obviously we don't wanna do. So stand in front of the bandsaw, hands to the side, make sure that guard's adjusted. And just like with any other tool, we're going to want to make sure we keep our clearances of at least 4 inches. We don't want to get our hands any closer than 4 inches to this blade. So we would never have little tiny pieces of wood trying to cut them on the bandsaw. It's just not a good practice. Okay?